Okay, we are in chapter 7. So just of Daniel, chapter 7 of Daniel. So just a little recap. Chapter 1 was about Daniel when he had first come to Babylon. It was a personal experience of Daniel. Chapter 2 was the first dream of Nebuchadnezzar, which was about revealing the future to Nebuchadnezzar. So that's a vision that Daniel could understand and see, and he told Nebuchadnezzar about it. You get to chapter 3 of Daniel, and it is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, something that is occurring in the present time. Chapter 4 was a vision for Nebuchadnezzar, but it was something that was going to take place within the 12 months. So it was going to happen in Daniel's lifetime, a personal experience in Daniel's lifetime. And then you get to chapter 5, and it's Belshazzar and the writing of the wall. Again, something that's going to happen very quickly that very night that occurs. And then chapter 6 last week was Daniel's account of being in the lion's den. Something that happened. So the only chapter so far that we have covered about future events is Daniel 2. And he told about 4 major kingdoms with that statute that we talked about. So now we get to Daniel 7. Things are going to start changing because from here on out, it's going to be filled with revelations about future events, things that are going to occur. And just like many things that we have studied, I don't know if y'all been studying, been on Sunday nights, and we're studying the Kings, and we just finished David with DC, and things are not always in chronological order. You find that out there. You find that out in a lot of books. They're not always happen in chronological order, you know. Same thing is here, because in the very beginning of chapter 7, you find out that he goes back to Belshazzar. Well, Belshazzar was that guy that was co-regent with his dad and that died that very night. He's supposed to already be dead, and yet here we are talking about something that occurred when he was king. So let's start right there, and we're going to read verses 1 through 8. Verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying on his bed, and he wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet, like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Okay, so Daniel's going to receive this revelation as he sleeps or he's in his bed, and he writes down a summary of it. And I'm like, well, why couldn't you go on into just a little bit more detail about this? But he doesn't. He writes down a summary. Another thing to note is now he's going to move from a historical narrative into apocalyptic section, okay? And there isn't a person on this earth that has tried to interpret every scripture written in the Bible as literal. We just sang a song, I was just noticing, we sang a song about mansions on a hilltop. What do you think that those mansions he's talking about? He's talking about heaven. Okay, even in the music that we sing, some of it is apocalyptic. It's something that you use different things to help describe it, okay? That doesn't mean that we cannot figure out how to interpret it. And in fact, later on in chapter 7, if you look on down at verse 15, right before, what is the subtopic above verse 15? The interpretation of the dream. Okay, so he's going to give a lot of it away. He's going to give some of it away. There are people out there that will try and take this and twist it and turn it and manipulate it to say whatever they want it to say. Okay, but I think it's important, just like everything else, to keep this in context. Okay, keep it in context, and God's not going to write something that we cannot figure out. Okay, we're going to be able to figure out the gist of this and apply it to our lives. So now we get started on this, and it says that Daniel wrote this down, and he wrote it down so that it could speak to this generation, the present generation, and this generation now. So what do you think he means when he said he saw first the four winds of heaven? How many of you have ever heard or even said scattered to the four winds? What do you think that means, scattered to? How do you use that?
It went everywhere.
It went everywhere. Okay, it went everywhere. Jeremiah and Zechariah both use this to mean the judgment, God's judgment on everyone in every nation, okay? But you think about God as like wind. Okay, we can't see the wind, but we know it affects things around us. Yesterday I was trying to fill one trash can with leaves. And I remembered Winnie the Pooh when he was trying to gather up his leaves, and it was just blowing everywhere, and he was like, I don't think I'm doing any good. Yesterday it was kind of like that. It took me a while to get one trash can full of leaves. We know that wind, it may be invisible, but it does affect things around us. And that's how God is. He's invisible, but he affects the universe. He affects everything. So to sum it up, God is working with and through the entire world. And then we have this portion about a sea, the sea. Well, that is a common figure for nations. Revelation is big on this. So the great storm on the sea represents the commotion among the nations as they rise and they fall in the oversight of God. That's basically what that is saying right there. So we have four beasts that come out. Do they all come out at once? No, because just like in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, one is going to come in after the other one. So these beasts come in one after another. They come out of the sea. So very shortly in that interpretation, we find out that what do these beasts represent? The countries and nations. Exactly. It's going to specifically say that these beasts that come out are nations or kingdoms, and they are hostile to God. They all possess similar characteristics. They do. But they also have distinct characteristics that set them apart. So the four beasts will not come out all at the same time, but rather one at a time as governments come into succession. So, you think about, it's not uncommon for nations to be characterized by an animal. What is the United States characterized by? An eagle. What about Russia? Bear, exactly. So it's not uncommon that these things represent that. So the first beast comes out. Let's talk about him. He was like a lion, but he had wings of an eagle. So this is going to parallel, I did not make you a copy of the one picture that I had in my book that paralleled Nebuchadnezzar's dream. What is the gold head in Nebuchadnezzar's dream? Babylon. Okay. So this lion is going to represent Babylon. This is actually an appropriate symbol for Babylon because it was common knowledge at that time that sculptures of winged lions guarded the gates of royal palaces among the Babylonians. A couple of years ago, we got to go to China. When we went to China, they had a lot of what looked like these lion-looking beasts everywhere. Even on their architecture, on their buildings, as the buildings came down, they would have a dragon that had wings on it and little dragons that lined up after it. I mean, they were everywhere. These kind of animals were just everywhere. So lions were considered the kings of the animal kingdoms, and eagles were among the most regal of birds. So this creature or beast denotes the majesty, the royalty, and splendor of Babylon. But what happens to him? What happens to him in this vision?
His wings look like
They're torn off. His wings are torn off, okay? He is basically humiliated and hindered when its wings are torn off, and he is made to walk on 2 legs rather than 4, okay? So by clipping its wings, this nation has been stripped of its royalty and splendor. So what happened in history is now presented in apocalyptic language. Then there's the little part about the heart. It says something about the heart here. And the heart of a man was given to it. Okay, well that is, a human is physically weaker than a lion. Okay, so Babylon is going downhill in part because of its weak rulers. Okay, and a human is physically weaker when compared to a heart. That's a downplay. To have to walk on 2 legs versus 4, and the fact that he now has a human heart, that is, you're not as good as you once were, is what this is saying. All right? So that we go from Babylon. Who comes in after Babylon? We know this already. The Medo-Persian government. So the second beast is like a bear. We started off with a lion at the top of the food chain. We are gradually declining, with the second beast is likened to a bear. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we are to the silver of the statue, a step down from gold. When you compare a lion and a bear, a lion is swift, he's stealthy. You think about that. A bear kind of lumbers along. He's kind of awkward. He's slower. He cannot move as quickly. So it is a downplay. But what's interesting about this is it says he was raised up on one side. Lonnie said that this could be that the Persians were supreme over the Medes. He did say that was a guess. But I tend to think that's correct because I've studied the next chapter too. Chapter 8. There's a ram that has 2 horns, and one horn is larger than the other horn, okay? It's more dominant. So in that vision, the writer is talking again about the Medes and Persians. So the Persians are stronger than the Medes, okay? And I kind of tend toward that. Is that important? Maybe not. Maybe not, but I think since this is talking about the Medes and Persians, that's probably what it means. As for the 3 ribs in his mouth, okay, so I'm thinking he's vicious, he's mean, he's eating and devouring countries as he moves along, kind of thing. Perhaps that's what it means, or perhaps it means 3 separate kingdoms or 3 separate governments, provinces that he has taken. The Persian and Medes, guess what? Well, they took Lydia, they took Egypt, and they took Babylon. They actually took 3. So it could be that it's talking about countries or kingdoms that he has already devoured. At the end of this little section about this bear, the end of verse 5, it says, it was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. Almost like it was given permission by God to continue to seek out other countries in its way of world dominance. Okay? So that's, again, I'm not going to tell you for sure that all these little details like 3 ribs and it being up on one side that's a fact. But it makes sense to me. It makes logical sense that those could be that could be what it is. Okay? Third beast, like a leopard. He comes out like a leopard. The leopard then would represent the 3rd kingdom. The Greek Empire of Alexander the Great, yes. And it corresponds to the brass in Nebuchadnezzar's statue. So a leopard is fast. Alexander the Great was known for moving rapidly when he conquered lands. The fact that this beast has 4 wings on its back just plays into the fact that he's extremely quick, his speed, his swiftness in his attack. It says Alexander the Great did in fact move his armies rapidly and utilize what may be called lightning warfare. You've heard of lightning warfare. Just means they move really, really quickly. So, but the beast also has 4 heads. This is going to give it away. This gives away that we are talking about the Greeks again. Because when Alexander's empire fell, it was divided between 4. Okay? That's history. History records the fact that Thrace and Bithynia were granted to Lysimachus. He was one of the generals, I believe. Syria and the east went to Seleucus. And we're going to talk extensively about Seleucus and his empire because of the location of where Syria is and the location of where Egypt will be and the location of where Israel is. We may have to get our map out when we start talking about these guys. Egypt went to Ptolemy. It's spelled with a P. It's pronounced Ptolemy. And we're going to talk about him a lot also as we go forward. And Macedonia went to Cassander. So I want to point out the latter part of verse 6 because again, what does it say in verse 6? This beast had 4 heads and it was given authority to rule. All of these empires have been given authority by God to rule. It was given to them. God gave it to them. So I think it's important for us to point that out, that these little descriptions that Daniel wrote down give away that God is still in control of this situation. So we get to the 4th beast. This beast is not given an animal name. In his vision, he doesn't have an animal name. What he does say about it is it was terrifying and frightening and very powerful. But what kind of teeth does it have? Iron. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, who's iron? Roman. The Romans. That's exactly right. The iron legs represented the Roman government. So, we've got 10 horns. And they represent the first 10 kings of the Roman Empire. So if you look at your little sheet that I gave you, it's contrasting. Well, both of them have them on there. But look at the bottom one. The first horn is Augustus. And just to give you a little background information on Augustus, I found this was really interesting. And this is a Sunset School of Preaching's guide. So Augustus... he is mentioned in Luke chapter 2, verse 1, because he was in charge when Jesus was born. Okay? The second emperor, Tiberius, he's mentioned in Luke 3. This is when John the Baptist and Jesus start preaching. All right? The third emperor, Caligula. I may not say these right. Caligula. I'm so glad we have somebody here who knows. That guy was a total man, by the way. He thought he was a god, okay? The 4th emperor, Claudius, is mentioned in Acts 11. There was a great famine during the reign of Claudius, and he passed a law against the Jews, and he persecuted them. The Jews were expelled out of Rome during his reign. All right, that's Acts 11. That kind of gives you an idea of the history as it goes along. Oh, who's the 5th emperor? Nero. This is the one you always hear about, okay? He was awful. He burned Rome and blamed it on the Christians, although there are not even supposed to be any Christians in Rome. But he blames it on them. There was great persecution under Nero's reign. According to tradition, he had Peter crucified at that time. He had Paul beheaded at that time. He's probably the one that put John on the Isle of Patmos. There was a civil war when he died. Rome almost fell completely apart because of Nero. All right? So then we have the 6th, 7th, and 8th. These guys right here, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. All of them, that's only like 3-year spans. They hardly reigned. 7 months, 3 months, 9 months. They weren't very strong leaders. And that's why those 3 right there, that 11th horn comes up in between them, or so the commentators say. So the 9th emperor is Vespasian. He was a Roman general, and under his reign, stability was established. He has 2 sons, Titus and this other guy, Domitian. And we're going to talk a lot about Domitian. So, that 10th emperor, Titus, he's the Roman general who helped destroy Jerusalem. He helped destroy. And then the 11th emperor is Domitian, and we're going to talk about him in just a minute. He's going to, or what it says here, is that he uprooted 3 of the other kings. History doesn't tell us that. So we have no historical evidence to back that kind of thing up. All we know is that those guys they weren't in reign for very long. You could tell from the study guide that Lonnie agrees with Sunset on that those are the 3 where the 11th one came up. What's interesting is the part about that the 11th one came up and took 3 of them. It's in this chapter 3 times. It says that 3 times. It's in verse 8, it's in verse 20, it's in verse 24. I'm like, there's something significant about this, but what is it that's so significant about this little 11th horn? What we know about this horn is that he is described as having the eyes like a man and a mouth that spoke boastfully. So history again reveals some things about this particular king. He was known from his youth as being a braggart. He bragged all the time, very boastful. He had claims of personal deity. All right? He began his reign with a letter that circulated through the entire kingdom stating, "Our master and our God bids that this be done." And so the custom arose when it came to addressing him. This title was to be used in all correspondence and in all conversation, "Our master and our God." He demanded that. William Barclay said of this king that when he came into power, there came a complete change. Domitian was a devil. He was the worst of all things, a cold-blooded persecutor. He enacted himself like he was a god. And under his rule, the Roman Empire set as one of its purposes to annihilate Christianity. Okay? So it wasn't that they were just banned from Rome or persecuted. We're going to try to annihilate Christianity. And just so you know, his wife and some of his top officials, including the royal staff, all got together and circulated a plan and had him murdered. He was murdered. So that is history revealed as well. So when Daniel speaks that he had eyes of a human, Lonnie believes that just means that he possessed intelligence, but only that of a human being. He's only a man. The scripture's reminding us he's not a god. Even though he claims he is, he's not a god. He is only a man. In his opinion, and others that I read, they agree that this little horn was Domitian. The one unique or diverse characteristic of this beast is that he has human eyes. So let's get on to the next little section. I'm going to read verses 9 and 10 because we're quickly going to move to a courtroom scene in these verses. So verse 9 of chapter 7, as I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. And I'm thinking I'm going to stop just right there because I want to talk about this courtroom scene. You've got thrones that are being set up, and there's one central throne. And who enters the room? Who's the Ancient of Days? God is. Yes. Okay, we can figure this out, okay? It talks about him being the Ancient of Days. He enters the room, takes his seat. I don't know if y'all remember, but earlier in the lesson we talked about how when Daniel prayed, he talked about how God is an old God. old in victories, old in judgment, old in forgiveness and mercy. Of course he is. He's been here since the beginning of it all. But here he's referred to as the Ancient of Days. He's seen as old and full of years and wisdom. His robe is white, which is like purity. It's pure. His hair is white due to his wisdom and his age. But what is not white? The throne is on fire. We have a fiery throne, shows the nature of his judgment. In fact, there is a river of fire that flows out. I love the fact that his throne has wheels. I'm like, he can spin around and he can see everything. There's nothing that he cannot see. Okay, so he moves around. He knows what's going on. It denotes the universal nature of God's judgment. Wherever men oppose him, there is God's judgment. The river of fire flowed from him. Judgment like fire flows out from God against his every enemy. And these thousands upon thousands are his myriad of angels that carry this out for him. They concur with him. They help carry out his directives. They're all there. So what we have is we have a courtroom that is set. The records containing the charges are opened. They're fixing to be read as evidence against those that are charged. And this is not final judgment. That hadn't occurred yet. These are things that are going on, again, that we're not privileged to see. God is up there and he's judging nations. Oh, you didn't make the cut. That is scary to me. There's a little bit of fright here. Because if this is going on now, then I think, okay, is he reading? Is the charges against the United States or against Russia or against anybody else up there being read? And he's like, your time is up. You know? It makes you think about things a little bit more. So everything's ready. The court is seated. God is present and the books are opened. Now let's start again in verse 11. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. And then in parentheses is verse 12. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority but were allowed to live for a period of time. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Verse 13. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Oh boy, everybody's here. Everybody's present. Daniel's watching as this little horn is being boastful, the bragging beast. These words and his acts are being heard by God in front of everyone. The scene moves on that the beast is slain and its body destroyed and thrown into fire. So verse 12 is interesting because it refers back to the lion, the bear, and the leopard. They are stripped of their authority, but their spirit continues to live on in that fourth beast. We know from history that these nations do fall. But when you think about Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it stood the entire time until the end. It stood until a new nation, it was smitten at its feet during the Roman Empire, and then they all crushed to the ground. So that's interesting. Even though they don't have the authority anymore, their spirit of them is still around. Okay? You know what crushes the feet, though, and causes them all to fall. What was it that crushed in chapter 2 that crushed the feet? It was a stone that grew into a mountain. But what was that? What? Oh, you don't understand the question. Okay, I'll go on. In Revelation 17, John will depict the Roman Empire with the very same images: a lion, a bear, and a leopard. There are many similarities in Daniel's visions to John's revelation. Okay, now the vision moves to Jesus. Okay, so just what crushes the Roman Empire and all of that. Jesus is born. Jesus begins his church. We are his church. We crush out all other kingdoms. That's what crushes us. So, how do we know that this is Jesus that has entered? What gives it away that this is Jesus?
He has dominion.
His kingdom rules forever, his dominion. But what do they call him? Before me was one like Son of Man. How many times was Jesus referred to as a Son of Man? Okay, so that kind of gives it away. And the fact that he approaches from the clouds of heaven. Okay, so a human that comes from heaven or from God. Okay, so this is a contrast already from something that's coming out of the earth or out of the sea. This is something that is divine, something that comes from God. He approaches God's throne, and he's led into his presence, and then he was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. The beast's judgment was handed down, and it is recorded that Jesus is the one that rules, not men, and all should obey him, not an emperor, a king, or any other human ruler. His kingdom is everlasting. And what is Jesus' kingdom?
His kingdom will not be destroyed.
It's a church. It's a church. It will not be destroyed. That is exactly right. And his kingdom will never be destroyed. The Messiah stands before God and he represents his people, his church. That's us. We have certain privileges now because he is our king. Is that amazing? Look at Matthew 24. I love Matthew 24. Matthew 24 and verse 30 and following. I'm just going to read this. This is Jesus speaking. At that time, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Here he comes back, stepping on the clouds. Okay, and I love that. He's going to gather his people to him at that point. I like that. So now we get to verse 15 through 18. We're going to get the interpretation of the dream. How are we doing on time? We're good. Okay. Verse 15. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. And I approached one of those standing there, and I asked him the true meaning of all of this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The four great beasts are four kingdoms that will rise from the earth. But the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. I'm going to stop just right there. Daniel's deeply disturbed. He's troubled. He moves to the angel. He asks him. I love it when the Bible just interprets itself. It's helpful. These four animals are four kingdoms. These four kingdoms are going to pass away, but the kingdom that the Son of Man receives lasts forever. This includes the saints, the holy ones, the ones chosen by God. We possess this kingdom, and it endures. The main idea of this chapter is that all kingdoms of men will disappear. There is only one kingdom that will remain forever, and you and I are part of that kingdom. Okay, let's read on verse 19. Then I wanted to know the true meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying with its iron teeth and bronze claws. The beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others and that had eyes and the mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the saints and defeating them until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. I'm going to go ahead and read to the end. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole earth will be handed over to the saints, the people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. Okay, so one thing that I realize about Daniel in verse 19 is he's just like us. He's not any wiser than we are. He needed help understanding his own dream. He needed help, and he asked for help. I need help understanding this. He's very human, okay? He desires to know more about the fourth beast. And again, the text describes this beast as very terrifying, that he has teeth of iron and bronze claws. It crushes and devours. Again, the 10 horns, specifically this says the 10 horns are 10 kings. And then a little horn comes up, and 3 of the horns are overthrown by this one. He had eyes of a human. He spoke boastfully. It will be said at this point that he will wage war against the saints. That's in verse 21, and it's repeated again in verse 25. My version says he will oppress the saints. But it also says that God's going to intervene on behalf of them. So, there are specific answers concerning this four beasts. There's a few additions to this beast that were not previously mentioned. One is that he will speak against the Most High. He will actually speak against God. Again, this particular ruler, because of history, we know that he tries to elevate himself to a god. All right?
They call him the Antichrist.
They did. I read that online about it. Exactly. This guy wanted to be worshipped like a god, even demanded it. Some of your versions will say he shall wear out the saints. Wear out the saints. That reference to him wearing out the saints just means he persecuted them even to death. The next part says he will try to change the set times and the laws. This is a little bit more difficult to understand. Ted Stewart from Sunset said that he tried to change the calendar. Well, he did change 2 months in the calendar. One of them, he changed the month of September and the month of October. September, he changed to Germanicus. And October, he changed to be like his name, Domiticus or something, Domitius or something. It's strange. He changed 2 months. After he died, they changed him back. But yes, he specifically tried. He tried to do away with the Senate. There was a Roman Senate, and they helped. It's just like the United States. The president does not have enough power to come in and do it all. He's got to get the House and the Senate to support him in whatever he's trying to do. Well, the same thing was happening in Rome. Only he says, I'm just going to do away with the Senate altogether. With them out of the way, I can do whatever I want to do. That was something that he really wanted to do. He just changed things. They could refer to humanly established seasons, festivals, civil ordinances, civil laws, human customs, all of that he just did to his liking. And so they think that's what that means. The last part in this says the saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. Well, a time would mean 1, times would mean 2, and a half a time, so that's 3.5. 3.5 of something. 3.5 we don't know. But that's how long the saints are going to be persecuted before God's going to intervene in this. We know that 7 is perfection. That's the number of perfection or completeness. And so this is exactly half of that. It's imperfect. It's incomplete. It's a failure, basically. He's not going to be able to do what he wanted to do, which was annihilate Christianity. But for a period of time, God's people are oppressed, but they are cared for by God. He will not succeed in destroying them. Although they are persecuted, they are preserved. So this little horn's power will be taken from him, and his empire will later be destroyed. The court will convene, and Rome will be tried, sentenced, and condemned. And God and Jesus will overthrow the power of Rome. They will consume and destroy it forever. The victory is handed over to the saints. They shall reign over the entire earth. So this is the conclusion. Every detail that will be given was given to Daniel. He has enough information here to give him understanding, okay? And he's troubled. He's troubled over it. He knows the people are going to suffer. The whole rest of the book, you see Daniel struggling with this. The knowledge that he has of what is coming to the Jewish people is hard. And he really struggles. They're going to suffer at the hands of the Romans. And so he doesn't discuss it with anybody. He just keeps it to himself. So there's a quote here from Jim McGuigan that I want to read. This is, quote, "See the picture. The saints walk into the judgment room beaten and battered, but still claiming that the kingdom is theirs. The beast comes in snorting and roaring into the courtroom, claiming that the kingdom is his. God renders a verdict in favor of the saints, and the beast is judged, and the kingdom is given to the saints. It is the saints that receive the kingdom, not the Son of Man. He's just the representative for his people. Jesus sits now at the right hand of God. He ascended in the clouds to his position in Acts 1, verse 9. He reigns today as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He's the ruler of the kings of the earth. It is written that in the days of the Fourth World Empire, God will set up his kingdom. During the Roman Empire, he did set up his kingdom. The church was established. Jesus rules today, and his kingdom will never be destroyed. It will last eternally. God determined that the Roman Empire would come to an end and it would be destroyed. And the book of Daniel was written some 200 years before the birth of Jesus. Long before the Roman people came into power. So it records all of this. These predictions are fulfilled in Roman history, and this is proof that the Bible is truly an inspired Word of God. It is unbelievable. So I hope this helps. I would say, do you have any questions? But I'm scared you'll ask me something. I'm like, okay, no, let's not have any questions right now. But I think this is interesting. What I would tell you to do is go home and study it. Go in Google and put in the name of this king. Go in and put in Nero and see what Nero did. Go in and put in Domitian and see what he did. It is amazing the detail that God goes into how many kings, and this king is going to do this and this king is going to do that, how many kingdoms are coming, this is the order that they're placed in. It is amazing. And what he tells to Daniel is just amazing. He must have had a lot of faith and trust in Daniel to reveal all of these things to him too. So that's your lesson.